There's a specific jar, you know exactly which one. It used to hold something else. Maybe instant coffee, maybe pickles, maybe nothing you can remember anymore. At some point, a lid was sealed, a label was never written, and something shifted. It stopped being a container for food and became a container for possibility. Inside it, a chaos of metal, screws of 3 different lengths, a bolt that doesn't match anything you currently own, 2 washers, a weird little pin you pulled from something you threw away 6 years ago but couldn't bring yourself to discard entirely, a spring. You don't know where the spring came from, and here's the thing, you've never needed 90% of what's in that jar, but you will never throw it away. The scene is 1987 or 1991 or 1994. The exact year doesn't matter. What matters is the light. That particular late afternoon light coming through a garage window, the kind of light that made dust particles look like planets in slow orbit. There was a workbench. There was a man standing at it. Maybe it was your father. Maybe your grandfather. Maybe an uncle who didn't say much but always seemed to know things. Practical things, physical things, things that had weight and consequence. And on that workbench, or on a shelf above it, or on a pegboard beside it, there were jars. Coffee jars, pasta sauce jars, baby food jars lined up like little soldiers, each one holding something small and metallic and seemingly insignificant. And if you ever asked, "What's all this for?" the answer was always a variation of the same sentence, delivered flatly, without explanation, as if the explanation were beneath the obvious. You never know when you'll need it. That sentence, that exact sentence, planted somewhere in the back of your brain before you even had the vocabulary to understand it. Not as a lesson in frugality, not as a lecture on organization, but as a philosophy, a worldview compressed into 8 words. A way of relating to the future that didn't involve anxiety, it involved preparation. Silent, practical, deeply masculine preparation. You absorbed it, not consciously. The way you absorb the smell of a place, not by trying, but by simply being present long enough. And then time passed, you became the man in the garage, or the apartment with a small toolkit under the sink, or the house with the basement shelf that looks exactly like that shelf from your childhood, and you didn't even plan it that way. You just did what was done. Because some knowledge bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely. It doesn't come through reasoning. It comes through the hands, through repetition, through watching someone who mattered to you do something 1,000 times until your nervous system memorized the motion even before your mind understood the meaning. The jar of screws isn't a quirk. It's a transmission. It's you unwittingly carrying a dead man's logic forward into a world that has largely forgotten why that logic existed in the first place. Grief rarely announces itself. That's the part they don't tell you. You expect grief to show up wearing its obvious clothes, at funerals, at anniversaries, at the sight of a photograph. And sometimes it does, but more often grief is architectural. It hides inside habits. It lives in the way you fold a paper bag instead of throwing it away. It lives in the impulse to save a piece of wire because it's still good. It lives, specifically and undeniably, in a glass jar full of random screws on a shelf in your workshop. There's a concept in psychology called continuing bonds. The idea that healthy grief doesn't always mean letting go, but rather finding ways to maintain a symbolic connection with those we've lost. The bereaved don't erase the dead from their internal world. They renegotiate the relationship. They carry pieces of the person forward, sometimes consciously, often not. Your jar of screws is a continuing bond. Every time you drop a screw into it instead of throwing it in the trash, you are performing a small and wordless ritual. You are saying something you may not even have the language for. You are saying, I learned this from someone. I am keeping it alive. The way they moved through the world still matters. Their logic still has value. They are not entirely gone as long as I keep doing this. That is not hoarding. That is not irrationality. That is mourning made physical. Now consider what it costs to maintain that practice in 2026. The entire architecture of modern consumer culture is designed deliberately, expensively, with billions of dollars of behavioral research behind it, to make you feel stupid for keeping that jar. Disposability has been rebranded as sophistication. The man who throws everything away and buys new is presented as evolved, minimalist, unburdened. The man who saves a screw is presented as cluttered, retrograde, slightly pathetic. There are entire television programs, entire content industries built around the premise that the path to psychological peace is emptiness. Throw it out, declutter, release, let go of objects because objects tie you to the past, and the past is weight, and weight is suffering, and you look at your jar and something in you resists. Not out of stubbornness, though it might look that way from the outside, but out of a kind of fidelity, a loyalty to a system of values that preceded you and that you instinctively understand has more structural integrity than anything being sold to you on a subscription basis. The man who keeps the jar is making a philosophical statement. He is saying, the future is uncertain, materials have intrinsic value, and competence is more trustworthy than convenience. He is operating on a fundamentally different epistemology than the man who orders replacement parts to arrive in 2 days. Both approaches work. But only one of them carries memory, only one of them carries a ghost. There is also something else happening, something that operates below the philosophical and closer to the neurological. The human brain, specifically the male brain under stress, exhibits a well-documented tendency to seek mastery over the environment as a primary anxiety regulation mechanism, while other coping strategies involve internal work, therapy, meditation, conversation. This particular neural pattern routes outward. It says, if I cannot control the chaos inside, I will organize the chaos outside. If the relationship is uncertain, fix the fence. If the diagnosis is frightening, reorganize the tools. If the world feels like it's coming apart at the seams, sort the screws. The jar is a locus of control artifact. It is a physical representation of the belief, the necessary, sanity-preserving belief that the world can be ordered, that small things can be kept, that nothing useful needs to be wasted, that you are the kind of person who is prepared, who is not caught off guard, who has somewhere in a jar exactly the thing the moment will eventually require. And when that moment comes, and occasionally, improbably, it does come, when you reach into that jar and your fingers close around a screw of exactly the right gauge, there is a feeling that is almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. It is not just satisfaction. It is something older. It is vindication. It is the quiet, private, almost sacred confirmation that the system works, that the old logic holds, that he was right. Whoever taught you this, he was right all along. You are carrying something that is becoming increasingly rare, not the jar itself, the mentality the jar represents. The understanding that the physical world is not an inconvenience to be managed through apps and next-day delivery, but a domain to be known, slowly, personally, through accumulated experience and maintained tools, and yes, jars of screws that will probably never be entirely used up because that was never the point. The point was the capacity. The point was the readiness. The point was the deeply internalized belief that a man who is prepared for small things is a man who can be trusted with large things. That competence is not a credential you earn once, It is a posture you maintain every day through every small decision, including the decision to drop a screw into a jar instead of a trash can. Your father knew that. His father knew it before him. It moved through them and into you in a language that had no words. So the next time someone looks at your shelf, at those jars, at that controlled chaos of metal and memory, and makes the face, asks the question, implies that maybe it's time to let go of all that. You don't have to explain yourself. The jar explains itself. It says, I come from people who knew how to stay ready. I am trying to be worthy of what they knew, and I am not finished yet.